We have a little bit of a different podcast episode today. We're not talking about business ownership or entrepreneurship or marketing or anything like that. We're actually highlighting one of the incredible nonprofits here in our Northwest Arkansas area. Today we're talking about Hub of Hope. It's a nonprofit that fights against human trafficking. And we have one of their board members, Kachia Phillips, on the show, not just to talk about the nonprofit, but more importantly, to talk about her own story and how it brought her to Hub of Hope. This is a pretty incredible story today. Human trafficking happens in America. It happens local. And the more we can be aware of it, the more we can fight against it. Before we dive in, here's a quick word from a business that sponsored this episode. We'll talk soon.
There's one single piece of advice that I give to business owners who are ready to scale their business drastically. And that's knowing exactly what you need to hand off so that you can continue focusing on what you're an expert in. It amazes me when I talk to business owners who are doing their own bookkeeping and tax prep, and worse, that they're going through all this paperwork at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, even midnight, slaving away trying to make sense of all of the numbers for their business. Business owners who are making it happen have already figured out that you can't do it all yourself. That's why I recommend Steve Lay with Equity Business Solutions. Not only is he an expert in bookkeeping and tax prep, but what I love about Steve is that he'll sit down with you and help you make sense of the value of your business beyond just reading a spreadsheet. You'll be able to make better decisions, and more importantly, you're going to save yourself the crucial time you would have spent going through QuickBooks or an Excel spreadsheet or whatever it is that keeps us up late at night. So save yourself some time and some money by giving Steve Lay a call at Equity Business Solutions, and he'll show you the value beyond your numbers. Go to equitybusinesssolutionsllc.com to find out more.
Kachia, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
So I reached out to you to come on the show. We were both at a BNI Visitors Day or something like that.
Yeah.
And you shared a little bit about yourself, and it was so incredible just in like the short span that you shared that I was like, wow, I need to meet this person and invite her on the podcast, which now I'm, the expectations are here now,
That's
right?
okay.
Would you mind for our listeners just sharing a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Kachia Phillips, and I am on the board of directors for Hub of Hope. We are a nonprofit that directly helps victim services for victims of human trafficking, mostly adult females. I am a survivor of human trafficking. I was trafficked here in Northwest Arkansas for 22 years, and I have been out of the life almost 10 years, and I just really wanted to give back.
When I hear that statistic, that data point about you, now, I think I mentioned to you, my wife's been very active in this community. And a lot of times when people think about human trafficking, they don't think United States.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, that's a third world thing. That doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And something my wife educated me on early on in our marriage, just how prevalent human trafficking is in the States. And even associated with some of like our most major events, like the Super Bowl, for example.
Absolutely. Walmart shareholders is a big one.
Oh my gosh, no way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible to hear.
Yeah.
So tell me, I'll go and give the disclaimer or an apology from the get-go, because I don't know how much I guess to ask or like lean in, but I'm so I don't want to be offensive in any way. But I'm curious, like 22 years locally, like, can you share more about that?
I'm very transparent about my story, so I don't get uncomfortable anymore. Okay. So there's probably nothing you can ask me that I won't be surprised.
Are you from here originally?
I am from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I had great parents, but they divorced when I was a teenager. So my mom became a single mom and working 2 full-time jobs, and so my sister and I had a lot of time alone at home. And so it's just really no respecter of persons, of how you can get drawn in. My sister met a man that was 20 years older than her, and he introduced her to some hard drugs, and they met when she was 16. He was 38, and they dated until, she turned 18 and then he married her. And so there was that 2-year of grooming process of getting her prepared. And that wasn't quite how I, got into it. I did end up joining them. But I was, at 16 hanging out with some older friends. I just, in school, I felt like I just didn't fit in with anybody. I didn't have many friends. I was very shy. So I gravitated to people that were getting in trouble and had kind of the same home, scenario that I did with single parents. And I just, one of my friends one day said, "Hey, there's this, we need money to go out on, and there's this guy that'll pay you some money if you just, go see him." And I was very uncomfortable. But I was also at the same time, I didn't want to disappoint her because she was my friend. And so I did it. And immediately after I left, I just had this shame just all over me. I was like, oh, I can't believe I did this. And what if somebody finds out? And so there was that, oh, well, you did it and you don't want anybody to know. And that was the beginning of just a lifetime of trying to cover up the shame. And then the drugs came, and, my sister was already, by that time, my sister had already met him, and it was just like one big whole mess, and he took off with her to Minneapolis and started an escort service when she turned 18.
Wow.
And about a year later, she called me and she said, "Hey, I need my sister. I really need you to come up here. He's being very abusive. I'm having to work all night long."
Wow.
And so I went.
And how long were you there?
We were there about 2 years. But when I got there, I saw they had this condo on Lake Minnetonka and were driving a nice car and had all these nice things. And, growing up, the world teaches us that, your value is by what you have, your material things, the money you make. And so I was like, well, I kind of want that, I want to have these things. Of course, I didn't really in the beginning know the intel of what it was going to take to get these things.
The cost, yeah.
The cost was just really high. And I was even impacted by the movie Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
I was like, well, okay, well, maybe I'll find that one day. I keep doing this.
Yeah.
And of course, that was a lie. So
22 years, I have to imagine there were probably multiple times you tried to get out or...
I did. Yeah, I did actually go to prison 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Not for sex trafficking charges, but for drug charges.
Yeah.
And some other things. I was trafficked to New York and back by a man who had me doing identity theft. So that's where my first time going to prison was. And it was here. And when the first time I went and got out, by that time I was working under my best friend. She was, I had left my sister and her husband to work for my best friend. And she's like, "Oh, we can make this money together. You don't have to work for anybody." Well, she worked with me for about the first 2 years and then she stopped working and I kept working. But when I got out of prison, she came to my house, my mom's, and told me, "You're a felon now. You're not going to ever make money like you were making. So you might as well come on and come back and make some money."
When you think back to that moment, I guess it's a hard thing to digest because you've just gotten out of prison. And I'm sure you had thoughts of okay, what do I want to do different now?
Yes.
And then you didn't get even a moment before someone was asking you. I didn't
get 24 hours before someone was like, "That's not possible.
Yeah.
You will never have that." And I just got discouraged. And at that time, I didn't know about any reentry services or sober livings or any of that. That wasn't there then. I mean, this is back in the mid 90s, you know? So it was, there wasn't those things there, placed there, not in this area anyway. So I didn't know who to turn to get help. My mom just really didn't understand what was going on. So she didn't know how to help me. All she knew how to do was she was raising my kids by that time. So, that was her focus, is raising my kids and protecting them from me.
Which, how many kids did you have at this point? 2 kids. And how old were they at the time?
At the time, they were, when I handed them over to my mom, they were 1 and 3.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. She was a very hard worker. She was an RN for the VA for 40 years. And, but what she didn't know is that she came, you know, she, was put in a foster home at 15. And so, but she had very good wonderful foster parents. But what she did know is that she knew what it felt like for a parent to abandon her. So she wasn't going to let that happen to them. So I was really grateful for that, that she stepped up. So
your friend twisted your arm into getting back in.
Yeah.
Which probably puts it lightly, honestly.
Yeah.
And so how many years at this point had you been in this industry?
When I started working for her, I had been in for about 3 years.
Yeah, okay.
And then I jumped over to work for her. You know, I kind of went back and forth some, you know, if they had some extra jobs for me, you know, I'd go over there but, you know, I wasn't seeing any of that money, you know, because once you're in, it's like, oh, well, you know, you got to pay your part of the rent since I'm providing our living, you know, and also, you know, the drugs. Got to pay for those too. So I was already in debt with her for all these other things. So I never saw any of that money.
So over the 22-year span, like what brought you to the point of finally getting out?
Well, I was 40 years old and I was tired. And one morning I was at my brother-in-law's house. My brother-in-law and my sister had been divorced for about 10 years at this point. But it was always a safe place for me to lay my head when I would, you know, burn out. But that morning I woke up, I just felt something different inside me. I was like, man, I'm just so tired. I can't, you know, there's got to be more than this for my life. And I went down to the store with a friend, and as we were getting in her car and pulling out, this patrol officer pulls us over. And I was like, she's freaking out, you know, and she's like, oh my God, what's going to happen to you? I said, it's okay. I'm tired. And detectives came behind the patrol car, and he was like, oh, Miss Phillips, we've been looking for you. He said, we saw you walking out of the store. And I had warrants for my arrest for selling drugs, delivery charges that they had, I had sold to an undercover. And of course, I was selling drugs simultaneously, doing all being trafficked to supply my habit too.
Yeah.
So, he's, you know, the detective said, you know, we can have a conversation. We can make this go away and you can do some work for us. And I said, no, I'm tired. I'm good. You can take me. Take me to jail.
What did they mean by that? Like,
selling,
okay.
or buying from them setting me up to buy from another person that's dealing drugs. And which they do a lot. So, I told him no, I was okay. I didn't want to do that. And they took me to jail, and I went to the Washington County Jail. I slept for about 3 days. And then the chaplain came in, and she was like, hey, I want to give you this Bible. I want you to read the red letters in it. And because they're for you. I was like, okay. I was, kind of suspicious about it.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, what would it hurt? So I opened to John 8, and I read 2 verses that really just jumped out at me. And it was John 32. It said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And then verse 36 said, he who the Son sets free is free indeed. I was like, okay. So that night I laid on my bunk and just raised my arms up, and I just started crying silently in the dark. And I just said, God, if you're the God who you say you are, then I'm going to sit here until you come get me. And if you are the God who you say you are, I know you're going to come get me. And I just laid there and I prayed, and I told him, I said, I just need you to clean up my mess because I don't have anywhere to go. I said, I'm not going to try. I had money to get out if I wanted to get out, but I didn't want to. I said, I'm just going to sit here. So whatever you have for me, I just take the consequences. And a couple of days later, this lady named Mary, who had been trying to get me to go to church, it was one of those, she would come by my brother-in-law's house and I would hide in the bathroom thinking she was going to look through the windows, look for me and try to get me to come out to go to church with her, crazy thoughts. But she came to see me. She found out I was in jail and she came to see me.
Wow.
And we got on the phone and she said, God sent me to come get you.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, Mary, And she said, no, he sent me to come get you. How do I get you out of here? So I gave her a random number of a bondsman off the wall. And 20 minutes later, they told me to pack my stuff. I hadn't met with the bondsman. I hadn't given any money. I hadn't done any paperwork, which is all the things that you normally do when you're getting bonded out. He just called up to the jail and told him to let me out.
Wow.
And so as the jailer was booking me out, he was like, man, that guy must really trust you. And I said, I don't even know that man.
Yeah, wow.
And then, of course, after that, we went to his office and, we did all the paperwork and things. And my friend Mary, she's like, we're leaving for a women's deliverance retreat tonight, and we want to pay for you to go. Do you want to go? And I said, yeah, I do. And that weekend, the crazy part about it is I knew God was like, wanted me to know it was him. Like, absolutely, there was no doubt that it was him doing all this. She goes to an all Hispanic Pentecostal church, and I don't know Spanish.
So, and it's Pentecostal, so
and
pretty animated.
So very animated, and all in Spanish.
Oh yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do this. There's something there for me.
Yeah.
And that weekend, the pastor and his wife and all these women just laid hands on me and started praying on me.
Had you ever experienced anything like that before?
I had never experienced, growing up, we went to church, traditional First Christian in Fayetteville. But I had never had a spiritual encounter. Ever. Yeah. Maybe when I was a child.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Out on the farm in the fields, and maybe I felt something, watching me or somebody watching me, but never had I had a true spiritual encounter with God. And so I did. And I was on my face, and I was literally coughing up things that I felt coming. It was almost like I want to say it was an exorcism almost, But when I stood up, I looked out the window and I saw a bald eagle fly across the window.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, it's done, And I just remember hearing in my spirit, it is finished.
Yeah.
And I walked out of there that day free.
Wow.
Like, from the drugs, from the alcohol, from the cigarettes.
Yeah. Like,
I went home and tried to smoke a cigarette and I got sick. I said, well, I don't do that again.
Yeah.
And that was almost 10 years ago. And I've not looked back.
Wow.
And of course I was tempted. People, hey, let's go do this.
So I was curious about your it's like when I used to work at a summer camp, a Christian summer camp,
Mhm.
and the kids would get saved. And one of the things we would tell the kids was, hey, your room's still dirty when you go home.
Yeah.
Like nothing else
Yeah.
you've changed, but nothing else has changed.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I was curious about, old connections and people.
Husband.
Yeah. Okay.
Gave him a ride one day, and we weren't living together at the time, and he pulled out some drugs right in front of me in the car.
Wow.
I knocked it out of his hand. It went flying out the window, and I said, don't ever do that to me again.
Mm-hmm.
I said, we don't need to talk, and I eventually divorced him.
Wow.
And, I felt that it was right. And after I did, there was a peace that I got.
Mm-hmm.
And there were a lot of other things that I still had to deal with, like what was I going to do? And I still had to deal with my consequences. I mean, I still was charged with, delivering drugs. So I went to court, and they sentenced me to drug court and 9 months or a year in the women's RPF in Fayetteville. And the Lord told me that I was only going to do 9 months in there. And by my surprise, it was 9 months to the very day.
Wow.
He was so specific, you know. But that was my one-on-one time with him. Like I was just in church every night, reading doing scripture writings, which I still do to this day every morning. And it was just my time with no distractions, with people, community, volunteers coming in and pouring into me.
Wow.
And I did the 9 months. And as I got out, I went straight to Goodwill and went to my friend Marty, who was in there every week pouring into me with her ministry. And I did the TEO program, reentry program.
And for our listeners who maybe don't understand fully what that means.
Yeah, it's a transitional employment opportunity program that Goodwill Industries of Arkansas provides, a 16-week paid training program for people who are coming out of incarceration or who have felony records. And once they complete the program, they can go anywhere in Goodwill and stay without doing another background check. And also we help them with certifications, welding, medical office assistant. We have an academy that they can move on to.
I did not know that.
And a GTech center in Springdale where they can go to an adult high school to finish to get their diploma.
Wow.
So there are just so many opportunities that they provide. Well, it was just a full circle.
Yeah.
I did that. I got my Serve Safe in culinary arts while I was in prison too. So I ended up being hired by a lady for their dietary manager at an assisted living. And I used those skills.
Wow.
I never thought I could cook, but now it's like I've been an executive chef. I've been a dietary manager.
We should have had lunch for this meeting.
We should have. So cooking is I love cooking, and that is my process when I'm angry, when I'm happy, when I'm sad.
Yeah.
That's when I cook at my best. And I just got really good at it. I was like, man, I guess God gave me a gift because, growing up, I never had that gift. I never had a desire to cook, but it's just something I can fall back on. And then, here now, I had met the executive director from Hub of Hope at a reentry coalition meeting at the Returning Home Center in Springdale. And she was doing a human trafficking awareness training that day. And this man raised his hand and he said, if I were to go to lunch today with a friend and they asked me, how do you really know that human trafficking is happening right here in our own community? What would I tell them? And so Jenny went on to proceed to talk about the statistics, how we've worked with over 250 women
locally
wow. within the 5-state radius.
Yeah.
And how prevalent it is here. And then just something rose up inside me like, you need to raise your hand. And so she called on me and she was like looking at me like, what is this woman about to say? But I want to hear this. And I stood up and looked at that man and I said, you can go back and tell your friends today that you met someone who's been trafficked in your backyard for the last 22 years.
Wow.
And then just the room got silent. And she's like, I got to know this person.
Yeah.
And, even through the training though, up until that point, before I met Jenny, I thought that everything that I did was my choice. Like I did this to myself. I didn't know anything about grooming or was it really a choice? And all of mine had stemmed from, when I was very young, we had a family friend, who had molested me for a couple of years.
Wow.
So I already had these feelings of shame going on as a very young child, and feelings that I shouldn't have been feeling at that time. And so I feel like maybe that childhood trauma had something to do with the choices I started making as I got older. And, in that grooming process, we were taught that, hey, this sex is normal. Like what we were doing was normal. It was a great way to get out and get rich and, all these lies.
Yeah.
All these lies. And the drugs I had to do because, well, morally, growing up in a Christian home, I knew all of this stuff was bad and it was wrong. So I just, continued to use the drugs to cover that up.
Yeah. Why do you think it's kind of a silly question because I mean, it's evil. So obviously it's going to be in the shadows, but it feels like there is so much people are in the dark about, in the sense of, I mentioned at the start of our episode that, oh, that's a third world country thing. That doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen. And or if it does happen here, it's in a huge, metropolitan area, New York or...
Statistically, and this is probably a low number, there are more than 40 million being trafficked every year around the world.
Wow.
And that is only the ones that have been reported.
Yeah.
So this is such a hidden issue. You might as well triple that number at least.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. And then, unfortunately, statistically, 70% of the buyers are right here in the United States.
And
70%.
And in positions of power too, right?
All kinds of positions of power. But human trafficking has always been a very hidden issue. Because if nobody knows about it, then nobody knows. They're not responsible, or if they turn a blind eye. But once you know, Yeah. Once you know, you're responsible.
Yeah, that's right.
You are. You have to be. So my heart and my job is to make sure that everybody knows that this is going on right here in your community. This is going on in the rural areas too. Labor trafficking is a little more high. It's a higher rate. Labor trafficking with children is high.
What is that?
At an all-time high. Labor trafficking is, bringing people over and holding on to their identities.
Yeah.
For them to work in housekeeping, in factories.
I've heard stories.
There's a lot of labor trafficking has always been an all-time high.
Wow.
Higher than sex trafficking. And, there's a lot of young boys that are being trafficked too, and men.
For me, when I hear things like this, I think two things. I think of my kids, first of all. And the second thing I feel is like this deep cynicism. I'm like, oh my gosh, like things are so awful. This is terrible. How do you stay hopeful? Or like, what does that look like for you?
I talk about it. I'm transparent about it. I do my part as far as being with Hub of Hope. We facilitate a 12-week trauma-informed survivor support group. I help these people that come into my office every day, and through the program I do at work, I'm on the receiving end. So, law enforcement, all these people, they rescue these people, but there has to be a collaboration with victim services in our community. Because it's one thing to rescue them, but the boots on the ground are the victim services to get them to a place where they can be okay, that they can love themselves again, that they can find good work where they don't feel like they have to go back, to reunite them with their families if that's a possibility, or with their children. Those are the hard parts. And in order to do that, there has to be survivor advocates, survivor leaders, and then the community just has to really come alongside them. And it's not really it doesn't seem like right now that is their focus in this area. I went to our Northwest Arkansas Anti-Human Trafficking Conference the week before last, and there were people from all over Mississippi, Louisiana, Texas, Arizona, Nebraska, and their law enforcement and victim services were collaborating, and it was working. And in the midst of all that, I'm thinking, why aren't we doing this here?
Why do you think that is?
I think maybe
Is it
some of it's a little pride going on with law enforcement. We have great law enforcement and they are doing a great job.
Right.
And I am so proud to be able to be among all those people.
Right.
I just think there is a lack of understanding how victims think.
And you're not going to really think about it unless it's like brought to the front of your attention. Like the statistic you mentioned about the number of women locally, it blew my mind just hearing that.
Yeah.
Something else that's always stuck out with me is this concept of dignity and like how do you understanding how do you give dignity, or I shouldn't say give dignity, how you recognize someone's dignity, because it's not something you give them, it's something they already deserve to have. So how do you recognize it? And especially with, these services that, bring people back into the community. And what I've found is that when you're not intentional for those things, it's hard for people to find a path to recovery.
And very much so.
Because they don't have a sense of their own dignity, really. So that's really exciting, though, to hear about I didn't realize Goodwill did so much.
Oh, yes, they do a lot. I'm really proud to be a part of their team. And also, we can arrest all the traffickers we want. And we can rescue all the girls we want. But if the laws are not going to change and be pressed harder on the buyers, the point is that if there's no demand, where will the supply be? So because of the high demand for these services, I mean, it's never going to stop, but we could do more.
What is the average person, like someone listening, what can we do to like play our part, to be involved? I mean,
connect with your local nonprofits that work in victim services. There are plenty of them that need volunteers. Right now here at Hub of Hope, we are only a 2-person paid staff working with over 250 women.
Wow.
Because our monthly donors are down, finances are down, and we need a paid survivor advocate on the team. But we're not going to get there unless the community starts pulling their shares. So we just ministry partners too, the churches, to get involved. Also, human trafficking awareness training we do twice a year. And if anybody, whoever wants that same training, will come and do it for free. I think the main thing is for our community to be aware that this is going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going away.
Mm-hmm.
It's increasing, but we can do better by knowing what to look for, and also, bringing that awareness. We do it in schools. We do the awareness training in schools, middle school and up.
Mm-hmm.
The healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
any emergency, fire departments, law enforcement, we do all of that training. So I think for mostly it needs to be awareness, but also we just really need the community to come alongside these nonprofits and help them out. So,
We have such a incredible area here,
yes.
but it requires, I think, everybody reinvesting.
Yes.
Back in that area.
Absolutely. And, we love our volunteers. We love the donations that we get. And we love, we're working hard on applying for different grants, but it really boils down to the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it takes money to run it.
That's right. That's right.
And I wish it would just magically appear or we could win the lottery, but, it just takes the community.
Kachia, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Sorry it went by so quickly.
That's okay.
We just scratched the surface.
Yeah, we could go on and on.
I will ask you one quick question.
Yeah.
What's your go-to meal to cook?
I have a shrimp pesto pasta that I do that it's my daughter's favorite. So yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, Kachia, thanks again for coming on the show today.
All right.
Hey, for our listeners, I'm going to put the information for Hub of Hope in the episode description. If you want to get involved, you can reach out through that. And also, if you're listening to the podcast for the first time, what the heck you waiting on? Click the subscribe or follow button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you are. We appreciate all our supporters of the show, our patron supporters, and our business advertisers on the show. Thank you so much. And that is today's good advice. We'll catch you later. See ya.